Hi everyone, this week we're going to go a little bit over MLA and also an introduction to your annotated bibliography. It won't be assigned until next week, but just in case you want to kind of get a preview of it, and also how to use some of those in-text citations if you plan on using them within your rhetorical analysis. So, you are doing our rhetorical analysis. I do want you to be using examples from the source, but you don't necessarily have to have a direct quote or paraphrase from it. But if you did, there is a right way and a wrong way to do it. So I'm going to show you the two right ways to do it. You can introduce the quote by stating who said it or including an in-text citation in parentheses. So let's pretend that you were writing a paper about building performance. Let's say you're really into engineering or whatnot, and this is what you're going to write your paper on. And you're going to be using a quote from a book written by a Dr. John Smith, where he says, "It is important to make buildings energy efficient in order to reduce environmental impact." And you found this information on page 50 of the book. So one of the easier ways to do it is to introduce it by saying something like according to. So that's what I did in this particular paragraph. There is a push to make buildings more energy efficient. According to Dr. Smith, a leading expert in environmental issues, and then you have your quote, "It is important to make buildings energy efficient in order to reduce environmental impact." You end the quotation marks, and this part is really, really important because if it came from a specific page number from either a book or an academic journal. A lot of academic journals do have page numbers, so these information that you might be getting off the MTSU library from academic journals, pay attention because if it has a page number, you need to include it. So even though I introduced the quote by saying, according to Dr. Smith, I don't have to put Smith in parentheses here, but I do need to put the page numbers. Now, if it didn't come from something that had page numbers, you could have ended it there. You wouldn't need anything in parentheses whatsoever. And then I just kind of followed it up. Dr. Smith is a leading expert in the field, so the inclusion of his opinion gives the paper more credibility or ethos. Because in this section, I'm kind of pretending like I'm talking about the rhetorical appeals in this. So that's how you would do it that way. Now let's say you don't want to introduce it with his name. So you would just take that part of the paragraph out. There is a push to make buildings more energy efficient. It is important to make buildings energy efficient in order to reduce environmental impact. In the quote, and notice here I put Smith 50. You don't need a comma between the Smith and the 50. This is perfectly fine. APA does it a little bit different, but as I said, for this particular class, we're going to be concentrating on MLA. And this is the correct way to do it for MLA. You don't want to put according to Dr. Smith and then have Smith in parentheses again. That's just redundant and it's not needed. So that is one way that you would do it. So if you use any type of citation or direct quote or paraphrase in your paper, you need to make sure you have a works cited page with a correctly formed citation. And this is the format for the citation. Just if you go down this list, you will be fine. First, you start with the author, period, and include a period after the author, and it's last name first, then first name. Sometimes there is not an author. If there's not one, you go to the title of the publication, which is the title of the article, book, or whatever, which is different, and then you put a period at the end, and that's different than the title of the container. So for a book, the title of the publication and the title of the container are one and the same, so you wouldn't need to double dip. It's okay to leave it out. It's so much better that if there's not something there, like if there's not a version, if there's not a publication date or any of these elements, leave it out. Because if someone goes to check your citation going, oh, I want to know more about this particular source, and they click on the link or whatever, and then they realize that you've lied on part of your citation, then that's going to damage your credibility. So I promise you, it is perfectly fine. If it's not listed, just leave it out. But the title of the container, sometimes students get a little bit confused on this. So let's say you find a great article on USA Today. So the title of the publication would be the title of the article, but the container would be like the newspaper. It would be USA Today or Time Magazine or wherever it is you found it. Any other contributors could include editors, artists, illustrators, anybody that they kind of mention by name as contributing to this particular article. The version, in books that could be editions or whatnot. So if you're looking at a book, look at the title page. Or if you find an online academic journal, usually it's listed like volume 25 or whatever. The publisher who specifically published it, the publication date, and remember that will be day, month, year, kind of written in the European way, and then the location. And for books, that would be like, in articles, it would be like specific page numbers, but if you found the source on the internet, then you would include the URL. So going back to our little example, so I just filled in the information. So notice some of them are blank. There is no title of a container because the title of the publication, since it's a book, they're one and the same. But it did have an illustrator, so I included the illustrator there. So what we would do is we would put all of this together, and this is what the citation would look like. And notice it's reverse indented. Notice that the book is put in italics. And also pay attention to the punctuation. So after the author, there's a period. After the title of the book, there is a period. After the other contributor, Mary Good, there's a comma. After the first edition, there's a comma. You basically use periods for the first two elements and then the very last element. And all the rest are separated by commas. And so that's just really important to note. Now let's take a look at a different type of citation. Let's pretend like you found an academic article from the MTSU database, this is exactly where it came from. And remember, as I said, with the MTSU library database, they have a citation generator for you. And actually, it generated this for me. All I had to do was click Create Citation, highlight the MLA, and plug it right into this presentation. But there are a few things I want you to notice. So since this is an academic journal, it's put in, the title is put in quotation marks because it is a shorter work. But then the journal itself, and it's a really long title because it came from a Canadian publication and they write everything in both English and French because they have two national languages. You would have to include the whole thing. But it is put in italics because it is a larger publication. And it has the volume, which is kind of longer, volume 151, number 3. And then notice here with the date, it's just August 1994. There is no specific day that this was published, and you find that a lot with publications. So don't worry if there's not a specific date, like 18th of August or whatever. It's perfectly fine to leave it out if it's not there. One thing I do want you to pay attention to is right here. It has the page number where you got information, page 271, but it also has the web address. It's both. So you need to make sure that you are including both in your citations. I did include the access. Now with MLA, there's debate now whether or not you have to put the date that you actually access the information for the first time. I choose to include it, but then again, that's how kind of I was raised, old school with MLA. If you leave it out, it's not going to count against you. But again, 11th February 2020, making sure that it is correct. So now, if you choose to do an interview, these are very different in their citations. They can be very simple. So if you're doing a personal interview, this is all you have to do. The name of the person that you're interviewing, just state personal interview and the date that you interviewed them. And sometimes students are like, no, wait, there needs more information than that. Nope, this is perfectly fine. Sometimes the simplest solution is the best one. Now, let's say you get an interview from YouTube, like you find this great YouTube interview that was conducted and you want to use it. You can do that. Interviews are great primary sources. And this is coming directly from Purdue OWL, which is kind of like the standard for online help if you need it. Go to the Purdue OWL website. OWL stands for Online Writing Lab. They have a wealth of information there. But so let's say you do find an interview and want to use it. So you start by listing the name of the interviewee. And then if it's part of a larger work, you include that in the title. And then and if it's part of a smaller work, you put it in italics. And if it's part of a longer work, if it's part of a shorter work, you put it in quotation marks. it's part of a longer work, you put it in italics. So let's take a look at what that might look like. So last semester, we watched an interview from Claudette Colvin. You probably don't remember it, but if you want to go back and watch it, this is the URL. You can kind of go back and find it. But if I were to use that in a research paper, let's say I was writing a paper on racial disparities, and I wanted to do maybe a mini biography of Claudette Colvin. Her life was fascinating. I highly recommend studying her life. I would list it by her name because she's the one being interviewed, Colvin Claudette, and then the name of the name of the video. So that would be Claudette Colvin, the original Rosa Parks. And it was published by Great Big Story, because here's the thing. A lot of times when students find interviews on YouTube, they put YouTube as the publisher, and that's not the case. YouTube is the platform that the publisher uses to get it published. It's not the publisher itself. So if you look down underneath the YouTube videos, it will say Great Big Story, or, whatever the publisher actually is. And then the date it was created. And then the only time I should probably see YouTube is in the URL where, sorry, that's my cat, where you actually found the information. So some little things about putting it together. You always list citations in alphabetical order by author's last name. If there is no author, you go to the next element in that list, which would be the title of the publication. 99% of the time, that's going to have you covered. But if it's not, then you go to the title of the container. You just go down the list. Now, when we're putting together an annotated bibliography, what you're going to do is you are going to be including a summary of the genre, that just includes a brief description, what's it's all about, what were the main points, and then you're going to kind of do a mini evaluation on it. So I by no means will want a full rhetorical analysis on it, but just kind of, and I'll go more in depth with your prompt next week on this one, but this is just to get you thinking, just thinking about the rhetorical appeals and if this information is reliable and did it contain bias. You don't have to go into huge nitty-gritty detail on an annotated bibliography, but you do need to prove to me that it is a good source. And we're going to keep them to about 150 words per entry, so not very long at all in the grand scheme of things. Now, here's the thing. You don't put your annotated bibliography in your research paper. The only thing I'll need are the citations themselves. So a lot of times students make that mistake, that they think they have to include a full annotated bibliography with research papers. No. Annotated bibliography is a very different animal than a works cited page. It's mostly to show that, hey, these are the sources I'm thinking about using, and this is why I think that they are appropriate to use in my particular paper. But as I said, we'll be going in more in depth in that next week. But if you are going to be using a direct quote in your rhetorical analysis, then you need to make sure you're using both in-text citations and a works cited page.